This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.
You're most welcome today. It's a very important series that is being run here in the Institute, supported by Irish Aid. It is open to those of you obviously in here, in person and online. Please note the event will be recorded and will be online available. And questions, etc. will also be, so just to be aware of that. So first of all, to introduce myself very briefly, my name is Orla Quinn and I'm a board member here in the Institute. I'm the former Secretary General of the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, and I'm also the pending interim director of the Institute from the 1st of July. So I look forward to seeing many of you in this room again. Today, we're absolutely delighted to be joined by Neale Richmond TD, Minister of State at the Department of Foreign Affairs, and he has responsibility for international development and diaspora. Minister, can I congratulate you first of all on the launch of the diaspora strategy for 26 to 2030. Those of you in the room who haven't had an opportunity to see it yet, I'd strongly recommend it. And really, I suppose for today, you will give us a very important timing role of Ireland's EU presidency and how we're preparing in terms of the development agenda. So, following your address, I will ask you to take a seat again and then we will go to Q&A. So those of you who have questions, you can start thinking about them now and preparing. And if you're online, please put them online and we will come to you as part of it. I will ask people to say where they come from, and we will hopefully have, I've no doubt, a very good discussion. But before we start, I'd particularly like to welcome the Director General of Irish Aid, Michael Gaffey, and invite him to deliver some introductory remarks. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I won't take your time, but I will just say that it is, as ever, a great pleasure to be here in the Institute for the Development Matters series of lectures which we sponsor with this. And this is really opening up a very, very important space of discussion on development. A discussion that has never been more needed than it is at the moment. So we take over the presidency of the European Union, which the Minister is going to talk about, at a time of unparalleled, those of you online couldn't hear me, but don't worry. At a time of, we're taking over the presidency at a time of unprecedented crisis in development cooperation. And that crisis is reflecting an unprecedented level of humanitarian crisis and conflict globally, and a lot of questioning about the purpose of development cooperation. So we are going to be able to use the presidency, I think, as a really good platform to open up discussion on these vital issues, which we still see as central to Ireland's foreign policy and central to the values and interests of the European Union. So I am really pleased to welcome our Minister, Neale Richmond, who has been in this role since February of last year and who has travelled extremely widely ever since then to virtually all of the countries in which we have bilateral programs, and has engaged in all of the major international conferences and discussions on development and on climate that have taken place since then. So we are really grateful to him for his leadership, and I'm very pleased to hand over to him and to welcome him to the podium for his lecture. Minister, to you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. From the outset, may I firstly acknowledge and thank those that have braved the heat to come in person and mock those who stayed at home with air conditioning or a fan. But no, this is a wonderful opportunity, and I'm very, very grateful for the invitation and the welcome from you, Dr. Quinn. And as I was reminding her at the outset downstairs, when I was first appointed a minister at the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, I was welcomed by the Sec Gen. I wasn't exactly appointed minister in the most straightforward manners, but I won't go into that, which she said, "Minister, it's great to have you here. Welcome you. It's a brilliant department. I'm retiring in 2 weeks, but don't let that faze you at all." But it's great to see that the retirement is going well. I hope you've got good use of the bike. that was gifted, crucially. Some people seek a carriage clock. I think you went for a much better option. But when the invitation came to make this annual lecture and they were asked, well, what will the title be? I said, well, there's no more obvious title than development and our upcoming EU presidency, because in exactly a week, we will have the opportunity to act not only as the honest broker, but as the driver between so many policy areas across the Union. And within development, there really has been no more important time. And before I get into the weeds of it, I suppose I'd like to start by providing a bit of context. And some of it isn't the happiest context, but bear with me. Progress, ladies and gentlemen, as too many people in this room know, in eradicating extreme poverty has slowed down in the past decade due to several interconnected crises, including slow economic growth, high indebtedness, conflict and fragility, and severe weather-related shocks. An estimated 826 million people live below the latest extreme poverty line of $3 per person per day. Based on current trends, we expect 9% of the global population will still be living in poverty in 2030. We have similarly stark figures for food and hunger, with about 307 million people affected by hunger in Africa alone. But we are seeing some changes. Extreme poverty is increasingly becoming a phenomenon associated with contexts of extreme or high fragility. While these areas are home to 25% of the world's population, 72% of the extreme poor live in these regions. Sub-Saharan Africa, where 16% of the world's population live, is now home to 67% of people living in extreme poverty. Global poverty remains predominantly rural, and children now comprise half of all people living in extreme poverty, while people with disabilities continue to make up a disproportionate percentage of the world's poorest and most disadvantaged. Humanitarian needs globally are rising at an unprecedented rate. Severe crises are being witnessed in Ukraine, in Palestine, Sudan, the Greater Horn of Africa, the Sahel, the Eastern DRC and Great Lakes region, and of course the wider Middle East. The conflict in the Middle East and the disruption it has caused will continue to have a huge impact on global food security. The conflict has already triggered additional humanitarian needs leading to displacements of populations. The countries that will be most affected are already amongst the poorest and indeed most fragile. The current crisis is also a systematic shock to the global agri-food system that has left the world on the brink of a historic hunger emergency. While we might hope to see a return to previous trading patterns, it is clear this will not happen for a considerable amount of time. All of this comes at a time when there has been a significant decline in the volume of official development assistance. Figures from the Development Assistance Committee in the OECD show that this has fallen by over 23%, the largest annual drop in the history of ODA. Projections for this year suggest there will be a further 7% drop in 2026. However, as I've said many times, the challenges we are facing are not just financial. We are seeing substantial changes in priority amongst countries that we once would have considered like-minded. This is bringing a pronounced shift away from a focus on human development towards an exclusive emphasis on economic development, heavily structured around investment, mutually beneficial partnerships, and private capital mobilization. There is also a change in where ODA is going. The large-scale reallocation by European donors towards Ukraine, away from Africa and least development countries, has been sustained. But perhaps more concerning, we increasingly see that our core values are being challenged. We are deeply concerned by the unprecedented levels of organised pushbacks against human rights, including sexual and reproductive health and rights and LGBTQI+ rights that have begun to unravel decades of progress. The pushbacks has the potential to undermine the legitimacy of the global human rights agenda and to curtail achievement of the equality ambitions central to the Sustainable Development Goals. All of this makes discussions around the future of development cooperation both timely and indeed extremely challenging. On the one hand, these discussions are happening as part of the reform of the multilateral system, in particular through UN80 and the humanitarian reset. The negotiations on the Global Europe Instrument as part of the EU's next 7-year multi-annual financial framework and the review of the Development Assistance Committee. But these processes are being matched with a flurry of international coalitions and conferences, to name a few. The OECD's Conference on the Future of Development Cooperation, the French-led Africa Forward Summit in Nairobi, the UK's International Partnership Conference, the upcoming Hamburg Sustainability Conference, the Future of Development Cooperation Coalition, and the Accra Reset. All of these discussions continue to grapple with the meaning of mutually beneficial partnerships. There is a focus on the type of relationship we need to see develop between countries, how to place official development assistance in the context of the totality of financial flows to developing countries, the role of the domestic private sector in development cooperation, and in certain cases, how to curb irregular migration. Some of you will have heard me say yesterday at the Dogus event, and I'm delighted to acknowledge the presence of Seanad McKenna, that global challenges cannot be solved by one country alone, and that this reinforces what has been chosen by government as the central theme of our upcoming presidency, the Irish proverb, Ní Nearcocur le Chéile, meaning strength with unity. The Irish presidency will focus on its efforts on enhancing the competitiveness of our European economy, safeguarding the values of our union at home and abroad, and providing for the security of our citizens. These three thematic pillars of competitiveness, values and security are interlocking and will guide the government's work as presidency. We will work intensively on proposals within each pillar, as well as on priorities, including our ongoing support for Ukraine and our global engagement. In an uncertain time, we will work to strengthen and stabilise the EU's relationships with neighbours and with our partners across the world. During this presidency, Ireland will host about 270 meetings involving ministers and officials from across Europe, including the largest high-level meeting in the history of the state, a meeting of the European political community. The scale and complexity of our agenda will evidently be greater than in any of our previous presidencies, and we know that rightly expectations are high. That also applies to the agenda relating to development cooperation and humanitarian assistance. Ireland's presidency will support strategic level dialogue on the future of development cooperation and humanitarian assistance. During our presidency, I will host an informal Foreign Affairs Council on Development meeting in Dublin, at which I will work with our European partners to discuss the very considerable issues we face, considering the future of development cooperation, the enduring challenge of global poverty, and how the EU can forge a path forward together. It is not lost on me that the last two presidencies have chosen not to have an informal meeting of the Development Foreign Affairs Council, and we are correcting this course and very much hope that this is returned to the calendar in strength. Because this conversation is vital now, because it is in the interest of the EU to be a reliable and principled partner for the long term. As global stability weakens, reliability is a key strength. It will help us remain engaged in a rapidly changing world. I've always made the point, development is not charity. It's about doing the right thing, but it's also an investment to target the issues at source, the issues that face all of my constituents. Food prices, energy security, irregular mass migration, climate change, conflict, disease and political extremism all originate from fragility. The primary objective of EU development policy is the reduction and in the long term, the eradication of poverty. This policy has been built on efforts targeted to eradicate poverty, reduce vulnerability and address inequalities. This is not just an objective, it is a treaty obligation. Development efforts must focus on poverty to reduce global and national inequalities and foster stability and security. Ireland's presidency will prioritise progress on our collective commitment to reaching the furthest behind, emphasising collaborative, forward-thinking discussion on reducing humanitarian need. We will ensure that strong focus on principled and needs-based humanitarian assistance in response to the most severe crises, including those in Ukraine, Palestine, Sudan, and the Horn of Africa, the Sahel, Eastern DRC, and the Great Lakes, as well as the Middle East. We will ensure that neglected crises receive the attention they need. In addition to the FAC development in Dublin, I will co-host a high-level conference on the protection of aid workers with Commissioner Labib, European Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid and Crisis Management. Pursuing agreement on the new EU multi-annual financial framework is an overarching priority for the Irish presidency. At its core, the EU's long-term budget is an expression of our priorities, and the Global Europe instrument will be substantially shape the funding and direction of international development architecture from 2028 onwards. We are committed to our chairing role, negotiating workable compromises for an ambitious EU budget that will see the Union through the coming decade. We are very aware of the responsibility now to ensure the EU is ready to face the unpredictable and the uncertain within a structured and reliable framework. We also see the importance of projecting the EU's leadership role in the vital area of development cooperation and humanitarian assistance as between the Commission and Member States. We are now the largest development and humanitarian actor and provider of official development assistance. Ireland has always recognised gender equality and women's empowerment as a fundamental human right and a strategic imperative. Advancing the rights and empowerment of all women and girls in society is foundational for global sustainable development, peace and security, and acts as a catalyst for economic growth and good governance. Since being appointed minister, I've had the opportunity to witness firsthand the importance of this work. During my first 2 visits to Africa, I had the pleasure of visiting Sierra Leone and Liberia, 2 of the most challenging countries where Irish Aid works. I witnessed a number of innovative programs funded by Irish Aid in rural Sierra Leone, which emphasised the importance of our work to address gender equality and promoted so many basic rights that we take for granted. In particular, I observed the importance of taking a survivor-centred approach to tackling gender-based and conflict-related sexual violence. For example, the Rainbow Initiative, which I had the opportunity to visit while in Sierra Leone, supports over 50,000 young girls in their journey to healing from traumatic experiences through access to much-needed health and recovery services. And I'm extremely grateful that the Oireachtas Joint Committee on Foreign Affairs and Trade also visited Sierra Leone and Liberia just in the last fortnight. As Presidency, Ireland will aim to shepherd an ambitious European agenda on gender equality and the rights and empowerment of all women and girls, strengthening the Union's role as a principled global actor. Ireland is a long-standing champion of global efforts to reduce hunger and malnutrition, priority issues firmly rooted in our own history of famine. Food security and nutrition are inextricably linked to peace and stability, poverty reduction, and economic prosperity. In the coming year, Ireland will continue to step up its international solidarity to advance global food and nutrition security. We are committed to our strong financial and political support for IFAD, the world's largest investor in smallholder farmers. Indeed, some of you will have heard IFAD President Alvaro Lario talk here at the IAA just 2 weeks ago on the Middle East crisis and its implication for food security. Our work will also continue on agriculture and food systems through partnering with other key agencies, including the Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Food Programme. This will be complemented by our support to agricultural research and innovation through the Consortium on International Agricultural Research and the Crop Trust, and to support African countries with the implementation of the African Union's new Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Programme. Ireland continues to be a global leader in child nutrition. This year sees the start of the implementation of Ireland's Nutrition for Growth commitment to provide €250 million annually over 4 years to address hunger and malnutrition globally. Now in its 3rd year, in partnership with the World Health Organization, UNICEF and Concern Worldwide, we continue to implement Child Wasting Initiative across 11 countries in Africa. Earlier this year, I visited Ethiopia, where I witnessed firsthand the impacts of the Concern implemented Hanano component of the initiative and discussed with a local mothers group how they had been able to bring their children out of malnutrition through climate-resilient livelihoods. During our presidency at all levels, we will bring a focus to the need for collective action when it comes to food security and nutrition. Ireland will support discussions on sustainable food systems to identify short, medium and long-term investments the EU can make to advance global food and nutrition security. We will highlight the role that the Global Gateway Strategy can play in generating inclusive economic growth. We must not forget the importance of using our voice within the EU to ensure that the gains we have made on important areas such as sexual and reproductive health and rights, including child and maternal health, are brought to the fore. Last week, I had the opportunity to speak to a gathering of the International Planned Parenthood Federation here in Dublin. It was challenging to hear firsthand how in the ground in many of the countries that they work in, we are seeing a very clear regression. During our presidency, we will ensure that we embed a rights-based approach to health, especially sexual and reproductive health and rights. Ireland will work through our presidency to continue to prioritise the global health agenda, facilitating discussions on the EU's new Global Health Resilience Initiative. We will encourage reflection on the reforms needed to the global health architecture, including on financing, support for a strong multilateral system, and enhanced coordination. The recent outbreak of Ebola in the DRC underlines more than ever the important role of international health regulations in ensuring global health security by promoting transparency, cooperation, and coordinated action. Climate change is having a significant impact across the development agenda. As COP31 will fall during Ireland's presidency, Ireland will be leading and coordinating the EU at the next COP, working to assist small island developing states, least developing countries, and fragile and conflict-affected areas adapt to climate change. Democratic values are under deliberate attack by actors who seek to undermine Europe's values at home, as well as to denigrate democracy's value in contributing to human development. Against this background, and in a context of tightening development budgets and a more explicit focus on mutually beneficial investments, geopolitical advantage and security, Ireland will use its presidency to insist that Europe's values remain at the centre of our development cooperation. The evidence of our own work is clear.
The development ambitions shared with our partners will not be achieved or sustained without respect for human rights, transparency, accountability, and the rule of law. Democratic governance underpins inclusive growth, social cohesion, and the trust that citizens place in their institution. What struck me on my recent trip to Malawi, for those taking count, it's 12 of the 14 Irish Aid Programme countries I've travelled to, just if everyone wants to make sure that my homework's being checked. I did promise to get to all 14 by the end of next year. 2 left to go, 1 in November, it's going to be fine. But in that visit, and crucially meeting with our ambassadors from across all African countries, what was really struck me is that the trust that Ireland has earned over more than 50 years of development cooperation. Our partners recognise that Ireland's engagement is grounded in justice, human rights and the rule of law, and in a consistent commitment to inclusive institutions and civic space rather than narrow strategic returns. In this new era of partnerships explicitly framed around mutual interest, the key ingredient will be trust. Trust between Europe and our partner countries, including those in Africa, trust between citizens and their governments, and between the public and private sectors, and trust that Europe's values offer a reliable basis for long-term, mutually beneficial cooperation. The key to that trust is good governance. Citizens who feel represented, decisions that are responsive to people's needs, governments that are responsible for their citizens and can be held to account, and the consistent application of the rule of law. We will therefore work to keep democratic resilience at the heart of Europe's international partnerships, including through the 360-degree approach of Global Gateway and the framework set out in the EU Action Plan on Human Rights and Democracy, so that Europe's offer is defined as much by our values as by the scale of our investments. Yesterday, again at the event at Docus, I set out how we will underline the importance of ensuring that EU policy and decision-making is informed by our people and civil society. To do this, we will seek to strengthen the EU's democratic resilience through support for initiatives such as the European Democracy Shield and the EU Strategy for Civil Society. I've seen firsthand the impact of Ireland's long-term development programmes to help bring about positive change in the lives of people around the world. I've witnessed the impact of life-saving humanitarian funding that is fast and flexible, reaching those who need it most. Where others have stepped back from their commitment to supporting those in need, our unwavering commitment continues, increasing our support for the furthest behind, increasing our budget for development cooperation, including humanitarian assistance. That is why we will bring into discussion around development on our presidency and our focus and our priorities of addressing the persistent challenge of extreme poverty, gender equality, food security, and nutrition and global health. As I stated many times, Ireland will ensure these priorities are reflected across the high-level events that we will host as part of presidency, but also through the chairing of a number of working parties at official level relating to development cooperation and humanitarian assistance. I'd like to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, with the very direct title of this series, Development Matters. Development matters, full stop. Development matters, and unfortunately we're at a period of time where we need to stress why it matters and how it matters more than ever before, and in a manner that is perhaps more digestible than ever before. Ireland is a proven international development partner for many reasons. For the selfless reasons, quite simply, that is the right thing to do. If you can play your part in ending starvation, in reducing poverty, in reducing disease, then you have a responsibility to do that. But it is also in our selfish interests. As I mentioned, all the key issues that are coming across my desk as a constituency TD all emanate from global instability and global insecurity that we have the tools, the means, and the desire to address. But the political pushback now, more so than ever before, is real. Fundamentally, Irish people support development. Fundamentally, Irish people understand why we have an international development programme and why we've had one for 51 years. But the ability to use development as a punch bag and as an easy excuse for every woe or begrudgment that someone has is becoming ever and ever more clear. I just have to look at the parliamentary questions that are put into my office. I just have to look at the social media accounts of people who hide behind the veneer. I'm just asking questions. I'm just seeking clarity, when we quite clearly see they're just looking for someone to blame. The political forces who want to blame the immigrant on all of life's woes are the exact same political forces who want to say that we're wasting money on other countries and somehow that could fill a nirvana that simply does not exist. Unfortunately, for too long, we've allowed that to go unaddressed to a stage that this is now a mainstream opinion in far too many European countries. So development matters. And we have reached an inflection point where we need to make the case of why it matters, how it matters, where it matters, and be loudly and forceful in it. This is in our interests, and it will only maintain if we back the rhetoric and the goodwill with real financial and political commitment. Thank you very much.
Minister, thank you very much for that. I've no doubt, and you mentioned having worked in the Department of Enterprise and Trade, you bring that experience, the experience you had again in the Department of Finance, and indeed social protection. So thank you, because I think all of that has led you to the very strong convictions that you have outlined here and the policy direction. We are now open for questions. I should say to people, as I said earlier, if you're in the room, you can raise your hand and we will bring a mic to you. And for those of you online, you can join using the Q&A function on Zoom, which you should see on your screen. And again, as I mentioned earlier, both the Minister's presentation and the Q&A are on the record. So I'm going to start, because I have the floor first, by asking a question, and I have the benefit of that. You set out a very challenging and somewhat depressing picture, Minister, I think, of the decrease in ODA and the falling away, both particularly with the US, but also in terms of some of our EU partners and the UK. What can Ireland do as a small country? And you set out some of the actions, but with the presidency coming up, there's a moral authority. But how do we actually get that budget back?
Yeah, thank you very much, Orla. And you're right, it's not just the US who perhaps were the most high profile and drastic due to the sheer scale. The British government has stated their desire to reduce development from 0.5% to 0.3%. But last year, Ireland and Spain were the only two EU countries to increase their development budgets. Denmark maintained theirs, and indeed Norway has maintained theirs outside of the European Union. But every other member state has reduced their development budget. And we're now at a really difficult position. And the reasons for cutting aid are manifold. There's no one set region. You have the ideological Trumpian approach on one hand, that's not just being followed in the United States, but certain other EU member states. You have budgetary necessity, as we've seen in the UK, and obviously some people are saying, well, we're going to put it towards defence and security instead. Now, I think that is a completely false narrative, because if you cut your development budget, you're going to have to increase your security budget, because the two are intrinsically linked. But then there's other countries like Belgium who just have budgetary issues in other areas. And this is the temptation we have to avoid. Development for on board snip nua or whatever may come in other countries is always seen as a low-hanging fruit. And when I met the British Development Secretary, she really depressed me when she said, the difference between now and 20 years ago is if we'd cut our aid budget by this amount 20 years ago, people would have been on the street. But here it barely took up a column inch. So that's what we're facing into, just to depress the room even further, if I hadn't quietly done it. But that's why we have a responsibility now. And it also shapes how you bring the argument. So it's very difficult. Ireland can't go in and take off a shoe and bang it on the table and say, don't cut your aid budgets instead of security. And people just turn to us and go like, well, you know, your defence budget, let's talk about that. And trust me, plenty of EU member state partners do want to talk about it. Equally, they'll go, well, it's all well and good for you talking about budgetary considerations. That's a lovely surplus you've had. We'd like a piece of that. And this is the real politic of it. And so there's no point in morally shaming anyone, but it is bringing into discussion, this matters. You're going to go up at a European Council meeting and wail about migration. Well, the second largest people flow that came into the European Union last year were people coming from Mali. What are they running away from? They're running away from conflict. They're running away from hunger. They're running away from climate. All things that the EU has pulled and EU member states have pulled funding from. So you've created this, so address it. So our ability for the next 6 months is to make sure that this is central to the agenda. Agenda more broadly, the presidency, the sheer fact that we're having a development informal, but also in how we negotiate and craft a budget. Much like 13 years ago, the key negotiating period of the European budget has fallen on the Irish presidency's shoulders. And that's no bad thing. It's our 8th presidency. The Cypriots who are just concluding and the Lithuanians who will take over us are only in the 2nd presidency. They will run good presidencies, I've no doubt, but there's a bit of responsibility that comes with experience. So it's to make sure that that global Europe instrument that has been outlined, the amount that has been ring-fenced for development and humanitarian is protected. a lot of people, and I choose my words carefully so I'm not offensive, a lot of people are circling around that and saying, well, what can we take away from that and redirect? And that's where we have a real responsibility for the agenda for the next 6 months.
So in terms of the MFF discussions then, and you've mentioned keeping it as a priority, is that a priority right across government?
Absolutely, because it goes to the three pillars that I laid out, competitiveness, values and security. They're all interlinked. Our values show that we believe in international development. Our security desire shows that this matters. That you cannot have good security if you don't have a proactive role. Because one thing that isn't said loudly enough, every country that Europe or European countries have withdrawn from, that gap has been filled by Russia or China. And they are competing interests either from a military point of view or from a security point of view or from an economic point of view. So we're very, very aware of it.
Yeah, I was struck actually sometimes that the amount that Europe does actually spend on development aid, it's not well known. Whereas I think exactly what you said, China's very well known for their investments in Africa, Russia more broadly. There's a communications as well, I think, just that people understand it. And exactly as you say, put the value on it.
And there's a communications issue both within partner countries and also domestically. So within partner countries, look, the old line of we were in Malawi, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, going through a road that had received serious European funding, but yet it was the 30-kilometer stretch that received Chinese funding that was fully branded. When Europe is providing funds and they're using non-European companies to build it, that's one thing, but then who's getting the credit, the responsibility? The economic investment of Russia into Africa is pretty much all military, and that's having very real consequences as their livelihoods. But then it's a communications issue here domestically. Our ODA budget will be €865.4 million next year. It's great. It's gone up. I'm very proud of it. It's still, by the way, not enough. It's still not the 0.7%, which I'll no doubt be asked about from this audience in due course, and rightly so. But of our overall budget, it is tiny. And when people are saying, get rid of our ODA budget and we can use it with fuel subventions, the €750 million package that the government paid for a 2-month fuel subvention only months ago is more or less our entire ODA budget. The value we get as well, the difference small amounts can make, the difference of relatively of funding support over a multi-annual in relation to child wasting. Even someone on an embassy level, €5,000 to €10,000 for a project can save it, has kept many projects alive over the last 2 years who would have shut down otherwise, whereas those amounts simply wouldn't travel as far. So we're not spending as much as certain people would like to portray that we're spending. And we have to be able to show that this is also really good value for what we spend.
Okay, great. Thank you, Minister. Let me see from the floor. I've one and then a man behind. So let's start 2 here and then we'll open it up further. Sorry, Cian, this gentleman here.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Minister. Heard you speak yesterday as well, so there's a running theme of the challenges that exist coming into the presidency. One thing you said was, like, development isn't charity, but it's the right thing to do and it's in our interest. I'm wondering how over the next 6 months going to be able to shape the narrative to bring that conversation around in that direction. I think over the last 20 years that I've been involved in the discussions, development was shaped because of that interest issue. A lot of large funds going into the Sahel, going into the Horn of Africa, framed around addressing migration or the push and pull systems for migrations, and they haven't worked. And I think that's what a lot of countries are seeing, that they haven't worked. Maybe not worked, but haven't worked as promised, for say. But that's also about the volume of intervention as well. Maybe it's just not enough. But if you go in tepid and fail, then you're rating yourself for fall. So I'm just wondering how that narrative is going to be shaped in the next 6 months. The other question I was going to ask was around the global health agenda. In November this year, there's the Global Summit for Eye Health. 5 years ago, the Irish government co-sponsored the UN resolution Vision for Everyone, which is the first UN resolution focused on eye health. Eye health is one of those health investments that is economically very strong, and the argument for investing in eye health is there, and the International Agency for Preventing Blindness has made that very clearly, and it's part of the lead up to the health summit. I'm wondering, from Ireland's perspective, are you going to be engaging in the global summit for eye health, and what are you thinking around it?
Can I just ask you to identify yourself?
Luke Rockney, CEO of CBM Ireland.
Thanks very much, Joseph. And I'll take another question just from the gentleman behind and then pass back to you, Minister.
Thank you very much. My name is Adekunle Gomez, Program Director of the African Cultural Project, and a very passionate Arsenal follower. So we are happy this year. I've been kind of doing some reflections over my 45 years since I arrived in Ireland from Ghana. And yesterday at the Tokos event, I acknowledged the work which NGOs campaign with the got involved in 2005 against the landmines. As nobody would disagree, land use, I mean, it's very important how we use land and how we treat land, as is usually kind of referred to, like the earth is our mother. Two of the SDGs, well, the one, SDG 15, talks about land use, and with it, the production of food. The Canadian writer, Joan Baxter, who spent a good number of years in Africa, she wrote a book, and in that, she had a chapter on the mining of rutile, which is part of the extractive industries. Now, she pointed out that for some reason, not a great environmental assessment, the mining of rutile results in tens of thousands of acres being lost to food production, and which is rather unfortunate. Now, we are also kind of aware of the DRC and the cobalt situation. So, looking at, I mean, recalling how the public opinion rallied to put an end to landmines, I was wondering whether there is a place to look at how the extractive industries are operating and how that is a danger to food production and other aspects of life. So that's what I was kind of wondering, and if the minister probably maybe assure us that that is an area which yeah. So thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm struck by both having been there yesterday. I'm like Metallica, it's a 2-night spread. But hopefully there was not too much overlap. I suppose framing the discussion, Dwelta, is really, really difficult, because you have to stay true to your values and why you do this, and that's your core thing. When you think about the core constituency more broadly, who believe in development in all its different shades and why they want it, they need to make sure that you're not using it as a tool politically eitherwise, that you still are inherently doing this for the right thing. And that has to be the first thing. It's why we believe in a values-led foreign policy. It's why in my role as Diaspora Minister, it's all about focusing on our responsibility to the vulnerable first. So that's first and foremost, we lead with the values. We lead with the values and we lead with where this is working. We have seen a reduction in HIV, AIDS infections over the last 25 years, of malaria infections. We've seen improved levels of eye health up until massive aid cuts. So development not only matters, but it does work. And we perhaps haven't been good enough at getting that discussion. The amount of people who've gone like, oh, development doesn't work, it's clearly failed because of X, Y, or Z. It's a lazy argument, and indeed, it's the need to challenge that argument. But it's also more than just about doing the right thing. It is in our interests, and it has developed real returns, and you can find those case studies. So it is the need for that level of balance that always leads with values first. But I think very much on a political reason, on a political level, to use that argument at a council when they go like, let's just move on from development and the economy can save all. Can't. You know, there is no sheer free market economic solution to very real structured issues of inequality that need to be addressed through real international development that works. It's a hard argument to have, but you have to have it in a multifaceted times. There's no point simply having it in this room or on the letters pages of the Irish Times. It's about getting out into communities through, be it Our World that Irish Aid runs, through the Global Education Scheme, or crucially on the airwaves and in the newspapers and online news sources that perhaps aren't always as typical. In relation to I suppose in relation to the global health agenda and in relation to the UN resolution, of course, we'll be fully engaged in that. Absolutely no problem. And any resolutions that we are agreeable with, of course, we'll support. And it won't just be me, it'll be very much done with Minister Higgins as well. And we'll continue to drive that work. Because I think iHealth is one of the most practical examples of where development works, where relatively small scale of investment can free up the economic empowerment of an entire community. And I think that's one area that will be very good. Yeah, I want to answer the second set of questions without being totally depressing, but I have to be realistic. Absolutely, we see the impact of extractive mining devastating food security. We saw it. We were in Zambia, and we were at a really important exhibition that the Irish government sponsored about the copper belt, about how children are growing up and their communities are being polluted, and it is an extractive resource. And the way it's being done, I'm not here going to completely castigate rare earth mineral mining or anything like that, but when people just come in, take the resources, leave, and just leave the scars of it as well, and they haven't rehabilitated the land, they haven't rehabilitated the communities, it has a really serious impact. And we're more than happy to continue to work to show the real impact of this. But as I said, we're in a situation where, and you mentioned cobalt in the DRC, and we know so many other countries who have unfortunately entered into bilateral relationships in this supposedly mutual beneficial terms where they are completely extractive relationships. It is a large Western power or Eastern power or other power coming in and saying, we want access, we want minerals, and in return, we will support your health system, your education system, or in many nefarious cases, we'll support your military. And that is a real concern. And that is a concern that we have to continue to talk about as a small member state, but to make sure that the EU agenda, and for some in the EU, they would love to use Global Gateway and abuse Global Gateway to become a form of that. And we have to stop that. Global Gateway is not a replacement for development. It's a good thing. I'm actually quite a fan of it if it's done right and done, kind of finish off on Dwell's point, to making sure that values are at the key and core of it.
Okay. Thanks, Minister. Maybe just to expand on that, I'll take a couple of questions from the online listeners. So Seamus Allen, who's a researcher here in the IIEA, talks about a potential upsurge in hostility to Europe, particularly some of the former colonial powers, and then suggests, do we have a special role as a post-colonial country? Are we, I suppose, seen as potentially more sincere in terms of values and promotion rather than that self-interested interference? So maybe it flows from, as you say, the Global Gateway becoming a more transactional, self-interested approach.
I suppose we have to be very careful about this. We can't over-egg that sentimentality as well. We're a trustworthy partner, not just because we have our own history of famine, of conflict, of independence and everything else that goes with it, but we're a trusted partner because we have been present in countries both through Irish Aid and through our partner organisations for decades. And we've stayed the course and we're still there. We are now the largest contributor in terms of development in Sierra Leone, second only to the World Bank. Not in per capita terms, in actual terms. We have a larger development program in Malawi, in Zimbabwe, in Zambia than the United Kingdom, a country that's 10 times our size. And we're staying the course, and we are consistently going out and meeting with colleagues both in the wider civil society, NGO, international agency, and indeed in government partners, saying we're not going anywhere, we're staying with this, certainly for the length of this government. And the hostility to Europe, I think, is in turn overplayed, and we're very good at going ourselves because you see a few relatively rogue heads of states who love to have a cut at the former colonial master. That's nothing new. That's always been there. But ultimately, real hostility, hostility gives way to need very quickly. And if you push away so far and then you go for the easy option of something quick and cheap from another jurisdiction with a lot of things. But I think the key role here is not necessarily on a member state basis and not necessarily for Ireland, but for Europe, for Team Europe, as the High Representative likes to call it, to really be quite clear. We actually are the largest provider of development in the world. Europe, the EU and its member states in its entirety is over 50%. Throw in the United Kingdom, which is still a large player, even though they've reduced their budget, and Norway, and you're nearly at 2/3 of the entire development infrastructure.
Extraordinary, isn't it? When you look at the figures, I think I saw the EU is 88 billion and 42% of the global funding. It's extraordinary. Separately, but again related, Nora Owen, who's a board member here and former Minister for Justice, is online looking in, and she asked specifically on gender, are women suffering more from the reduction in aid, given that in many places they take the major role in growing food, collecting water, minding children, etc.? Is there a gender aspect to the reductions?
Short answer, yes. I'm going to expand on it briefly. Before I'll tell a little anecdote that Nora told last week when she was chair of the Oireachtas Development Assistance Committee, as it was called, and the late Gareth Fitzgerald, who set up Irish Aid, was the Taoiseach. It was the time of Live Aid, and it was great. All these albums were being sold through Ireland, but 50% of the purchase fee was going back to the tax exchequer, which was then going to fund our development programme. So she made the presentation. She went around all the golden discs and HMVs and was able to calculate all the sales, and Garrett was able to make an implementation in the budget to even that out. So it's the practical approach that matters as well, not just the symbolic. But yes, women are, particularly young women and girls, are facing the brunt of it. As I said, HIV/AIDS infections are going up, FGM cases are going up, maternal health rates are going down. We have seen consistently, particularly in maternal health partners, that there's been, with the global gag rule, there's been a really nefarious impact on the provision of global health, and organisations who would have provided the full suite of sexual and reproductive health and rights are just seeing the last 10% withdrawn. And you will have some people in isolated communities who will receive 90% of treatment, but then the last 10% they'll have to travel for hundreds of kilometres. And quite simply, and this is something, and I hate saying it like this, and you can only say it so many times, but twofold, more people are dying now because of aid cuts. People are dying. This isn't a calculation, this is human beings. The level of incidences where we talk about gender-based violence a lot in this country, and my senior minister as Minister for Justice was really, really impactful in relation to our agenda. And only yesterday we had a meeting on a British-Irish meeting where the domestic and gender-based violence initiative that she put in place is still impactful. Ultimately, when we talk about gender-based violence in conflict areas, they're using the phrase or the acronym GBV kind of loses the depravity of what's going on, the sheer horrors. And when you sit in a room like I did in Addis with women who are survivors of gang rape, of domestic violence, when you meet people who have been forced into marriage at 13, 14 years old, it's just that level of humanity that we have to insert into the conversation, but not with some sort of shock and awe, misery sells approach, but just to paint out, this is what happens when aid budgets are cut.
Yeah, thank you. Let me go back to the room. Yes. Wait for the mic for you now.
Thanks, Jane Ann from DOCUS, and nice to see you again, Minister, and thank you for your words today and yesterday, indeed. I think that I think Ireland's outlook coming into this presidency is really welcome. I think, as many European networks have told me, they're really reliant on Ireland's voice and that value-based approach coming in, particularly around the negotiations around global Europe. I've two questions. One is around kind of how confident are you that the Global Europe instrument and budget can be protected from further or from cuts essentially in the negotiation process? And the second one is really around our own commitments. I suppose, do you see an appetite within government to increase our own spending on ODA? Because although we're increasing in terms of in amounts year on year, our percentage is actually declining. So in terms of trying to match our values with that action, is there an appetite for that? Because I think it's one of Ireland's key strengths is bringing that values to the table. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that, Seanad.
Yeah, when it comes to European, and I really hope I'm not, at the moment I am actually quite confident that this can be delivered. But it's not going to be easy, and it's not a given. It's going to be 6 months of literally, it's like when Ghana played England the other night, just parking the bus, because people are going to come and looking, sorry to use that, some great results, by the way, congratulations. But yeah, but it is that, because people are coming, as I said right at the outset, too many people just have a problem mindset, oh, let's just take away from that. And unlike 20 years ago, there is no outrage. And then it kind of feeds into our own commitments. When I took on this role, I very confidently went into every room and said, we're going to increase our development budget. Now, that confidence wasn't necessarily based in absolute confidence, but sometimes you just need to keep saying it until people actually do it. And I was really, really grateful that Minister Jack Chambers visited both Nigeria and Senegal for St. Patrick's Day. And he saw some of the Irish Aid work, particularly in Senegal, and opened our new chancery in Nigeria. And that personal impact is important. I referenced the Oireachtas Foreign Affairs Committee going to Sierra Leone and Liberia. I was only weeks in the Senate over 10 years ago when World Vision through AWAPA, which existed at the time and is gone now, and Nora actually used to be really important on it, brought 3 of us to Uganda to visit the refugee camps on the border with South Sudan. So these are really important to find that appetite. I do think it is there, and it goes back to inherently, the vast majority of Oireachtas members are supportive to aid. How many would be giving out if the ODA budget would be cut is another question, and this is my concern. And my responsibility as the politician in the room. And I think we can't take for granted being able simply to increase, never mind the percentage or actual amount, at a time when everyone else is cutting, shouldn't be taken for granted. It's not done very easily, even though our economic reports are good, there is always economic pressures. And the first thing when people were angry about fuel prices and everything else that they wanted to cut was money going to Africa and money going to Ukraine in those very blunt terms. So I think we will be able to, at the very least, maintain the amount. And I'm going to work really, really hard. And I gave this commitment to all our ambassadors in Africa when I visit them. And I say this regularly. Already had the engagements with Minister McEntee, with the Taoiseach, with Minister Chambers, with the Taoiseach, and will continue to do so. And it really does require that real pressure that this matters to the Irish people as a whole, that the Irish people acknowledge and appreciate the importance of it, and that we're realistic that we may get an incremental increase like we did last year in actual amounts. And at least as long as we're still increasing, that is really, really important. And again, it goes to our values and gives us the moral imperative on a European level to say, look, ourselves and Spain have increased. And for a lot of other countries, they're relying on the European Union to make up the fact that they've cut domestically. We're not coming for that. We're coming that we're increasing, and we think the EU should maintain. And we think that's achievable and it's realistic.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Any other questions from the floor? Jill, yes.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Minister, for a fascinating presentation and a heartfelt one as well. I think that's very much part of the whole thing, is making it human-centric, the story, not, as you said, ideological. And I think that's very clear. I was wondering if you talk about what you mentioned there, Commissioner Labib coming to speak with you, because I think that's another agenda that perhaps people aren't too much aware of, except what they see in the news. And I know that DOCUS and all the other terrific NGOs that we have here are one side of the equation, but there are also volunteers working as ambulance people and doctors, nurses, and people in all sorts of careers contributing. And I just wondered, it's also linked to respect for international law, and I think that's really important in terms of humanitarian law. So just wondering if that will be also part of your discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. Last year was the deadliest year on earth to be a humanitarian worker. More humanitarian workers were killed. And it's very pronounced based on the genocide in Gaza, based on the absolute horrors in Sudan, and of course Russia's war in Ukraine. So you can cite 3 really big examples before you even go into the wider Sahel and how devastating it's been. At the UN high-level week for the General Assembly last year, I signed the Declaration for the Protection of Workers that the Australians put forward, and hosting this with Commissioner Labib as part of our presidency is a really clear statement that we have to protect people who are prepared to go into the fray. A lot of people in this room have been in very difficult situations. They've been on field visits or they've worked and they've been exposed to what it is, but the vast majority of people haven't. And it's the provision to make sure that this protection is increasingly being, like so many facets of international law, being chipped away at a rapid pace ever since the pandemic. And this is just another area that is unfortunately put up for attack, to be quite frank, and it requires particularly values-led actors like Ireland to make sure we're very pronounced and we're very clear about it, but with some great difficulty. I just wanted to kind of sort of relate it to the point you make in relation to volunteerism. And I think this is something that when we talk about development isn't charity, but it's often lost in the discussion. The first opportunity a lot of people get exposed to anything in relation to social justice or solidarity or Ireland's place in the world is often as a volunteer. And we cannot be too quiet about recognising our very strong missionary history, particularly in Africa. I go into so many meetings with ministers who were educated by an Irish nun or an Irish priest, and there is a long strain of benevolence there that needs to be maintained, enriched, and of course in a fully open way. But one of the most refreshing conversations I had was about 6 weeks ago, maybe longer ago. I brought in 25 fifth-year students from St. Penilla's College in Kilmacud, which is obviously in my constituency, but that's not why I'm mentioning it. And they were getting ready to go to Zambia for a 2-week exchange. And this is something, and people can be very cynical and go like, oh, this is, development tourism or something like that. But young men at the moment are subject to a lot of attention, and it can be because of adolescence, it can, the show, social media, and people can be very worried that they're all listening to Joe Rogan and going down the Andrew Tate rabbit hole. And I think we give young men and young people more generally a huge disservice. This matters to them. And the values that were really to the fore when Ireland was a much poorer place are still there, and we dismiss and abandon them at our peril. Because there was one young man who had been on the trip last year, and he got up to speak to his peers, the 25 guys from the year below, about how impactful that 2 weeks was on him as a person. Never mind about the work they did, but he said, this has completely changed me as a person for a better way. He says, I can't believe that I'm standing here a year later and saying 2 weeks where I wasn't allowed access to my mobile phone was the best 2 weeks. That the joy I got for working with young people for 2 weeks completely changed his outlook on the world, completely changed his look. And we can't give up on that level of volunteerism. That many people are dismissed and old-fashioned, and in ways it is inefficient. But if we're trying to bring that coalition to save development cooperation, the human coalition, both the human stories and the human experiences are so important.
Okay. We're coming to the end of our session, so I'm not going to get to all the questions online, and I'm sure there may be other questions in the room as well, Minister. Maybe just a final one to give you a wrap up. What would success look like for Ireland and you in the area of development cooperation? What would you like to see at the end of our presidency?
I'd like us to be on a pathway where the global Europe budget is protected and the development and humanitarian budget is protected, and we're back talking about development at a European level as a responsibility in a way that unfortunately we haven't been for the last 2 years. Okay,
well that's a very simple, in some ways, but very complex. But it's a great ambition to have. So on all our behalves, can I say we obviously support you greatly in the scale of your ambition. We're delighted you had the time to come today. We'll be obviously watching this agenda, and we are now, I think, collectively more informed and clearly more engaged in the debate that will take place. And we wish you every success in the presidency.
This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.